The wind that swept across the flat roofs of Cyrene carried desert dust, and a rumor so startling that even the hardened merchants of the spice market stopped haggling. The crucified Galilean had risen, and men who once fished the Sea of Galilee were now speaking in Cyrenian Greek and in the Libyan tongues of home. Somewhere inside the city walls, a young Levite named John Mark heard the rumor with the same tremor his mother Mary felt when she bolted the cedar gate of her Jerusalem house the night the soldiers dragged James away. Neither mother nor son knew it yet, but the next footsteps they took would beat a path to Africa long before the name of Christ was whispered in the marble forums of Rome or the misty groves of Gaul. Mark's fingers still smelled of salted fish when he sailed from the port of Cyrene in the spring of 42 AD, the very year the legions of Claudius tightened their grip on the wheat routes of Egypt. Behind him lay the family estate where Torah scrolls had been copied onto gazelle skin by moonlight. Ahead, the Pharos lighthouse rose from the Alexandrian surf like a bronze finger beckoning him to a continent already ancient when Alexander was a boy. The city he entered was a mosaic of marble colonnades, Coptic alleys, and Jewish quarters where traders from Elephantine spoke Nubian, and the air tasted of lotus and copper. According to the 4th century witness of Eusebius, Mark did not arrive as a stranger. He came sent to preach in Egypt, carrying the stories he had learned while crouched beside Peter in a Roman prison. Stories, Peter insisted, must be written for those who will never see the streets of Zion. The first gathering was in the house of a Jewish rope maker near the eastern harbor. Mark spoke in Greek, then in hesitant Coptic, while the Nile wind rattled the papyrus shutters. A Nubian slave girl named Taus listened with tears spattering the mud floor. Her master later freed her, and she became the first African deaconess, carrying the gospel along the river barges to Philae. By 49 AD, a fledgling community met in the catacombs beneath the Serapeum, its hymns echoing against walls painted with Anubis and Christ side by side. Tradition, preserved by Clement of Alexandria and later dramatized in the 1969 documentary The Copts, Egypt's Living Treasures, claims Mark founded a school there so ancient that even Pantaenus, the Stoic philosopher who converted in 180 AD, called it a school of sacred teachings since the time of Mark. But every candle casts a shadow. In 68 AD, the same year Nero's madness set Rome ablaze, a mob of pagan priests dragged Mark through the streets of Alexandria during the festival of Serapis. They wrapped a rope around his neck and dragged him until the stones were slick with blood. As he died, witnesses swore they heard him whispering verses from the psalm he had once copied for his mother. From the ends of the earth, I call to you. His body was spirited away by night. Centuries later, Venetian merchants would steal what they claimed were his relics. Yet in Alexandria, the shrine of St. Mark still smells of myrrh and sea salt. The story, however, was already running ahead of its martyr. Southward, along the granite cataracts of the Nile, the gospel crossed into Ethiopia on the shoulders of a court official whose chariot wheels had once turned on the desert road to Gaza. In Acts 8, Philip encounters the unnamed treasurer of Queen Candace, reading Isaiah by the shade of a doom palm. The baptism that followed was not a solitary splash in a roadside pool, but the seed of an entire kingdom. Ethiopian tradition recorded in the 1951 BBC documentary The Queen of Sheba's Air Shoals that when the eunuch returned to Aksum, he carried not only the Torah scroll he had purchased in Jerusalem, but a fragment of the true cross, a gift from Philip wrapped in scarlet silk. Archaeologists working in Aksum have uncovered 4th century coins bearing the Christian cross decades before Constantine ever dreamed of Milvian Bridge. Yet the most audacious journey was still to come. In 60 AD, as Paul plotted a circuitous route to Spain that would not be fulfilled for another decade, another disciple slipped out of Jerusalem under cover of the Feast of Tabernacles. Matthew, the former tax collector whose fingers once counted Roman denarii, now carried a single leather satchel containing the Hebrew sayings of Jesus, a text scholars today call the Logia. Coptic fragments in the British Museum suggest he sailed from Caesarea to the island of Elephantine in the Nile's first cataract, where a Jewish military colony had guarded the frontier since the days of Jeremiah. There, in a mud brick synagogue whose beams still bore Persian carvings, Matthew translated those sayings into Ge'ez, the language that would one day cradle Ethiopia's liturgy. Ethiopian chronicles preserved, in the 1936 ethnographic survey film, The Glory of the King's Record, that he pressed farther south to the highlands of Aksum, preaching to shepherds beneath the incense trees until, tradition says, he was martyred at Nadar, his grave marked by 3 stones no bigger than a shepherd's hearth. The Mediterranean world barely noticed these footfalls. Rome was busy crucifying Jews. Greece debated philosophy. Gaul was still a forest of blue-painted warriors. But in the courtyards of Alexandria, dark-skinned catechumens debated the nature of Christ with philosophers trained in Plato's academy. In the highlands of Ethiopia, kings traced crosses in the earth with the same staffs their ancestors had raised to the moon. Christianity was not brought to Africa by the sails of empire. It was born there in the womb of Africa itself, nursed by mothers like Mary of Cyrene and midwives like Thais. And then came the first great reversal. In 642 AD, the armies of Islam swept across the Nile Delta. The great library of Alexandria, already scarred by Roman fires, became a furnace of scrolls whose smoke carried the ashes of Origen and Athanasius into the sky. Christian bells fell silent in Carthage. Desert monks fled south with their codices wrapped in sackcloth. For 1,000 years, the memory of an African Christianity older than Europe's was buried beneath shifting sands and colonial myth. Victorian missionaries arrived in the 1800s, armed with maps that showed Africa as a blank space waiting for the gospel. Unaware they were retracing routes, first walked by barefoot disciples who had carried no flag but the cross. Still, the whisper refused to die. In the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, priests chant in Ge'ez, whose cadences echo Matthew's first translations. In the Coptic monasteries of Wadi Natron, monks still copy gospels onto vellum, stained with saffron and indigo. And somewhere along the Red Sea, a fisherman's net brings up a shard of pottery inscribed with the Chiro, fired in a kiln that once warmed an African Christian potter while London was still a marshland trading post. So the question remains, curling like incense in the air above the Sahara, what else lies beneath the sand and the centuries of forgetting? What scrolls, what tombs, what forgotten kingdoms await the archaeologist's brush? The disciples who carried the gospel southward vanished into the vastness of Africa, leaving only footprints that the wind has not entirely erased. If the story of Mark and Matthew, of Theos and the Ethiopian eunuch, can survive persecution, conquest, and deliberate amnesia, then so might other voices we have not yet heard. Until the next dig, until the next fragile papyrus surfaces in the back room of a Cairo souk, the tale is unfinished. History off the map is listening for every rustle of parchment, every echo of an ancient hymn. If this journey stirred something in you, curiosity, wonder, even the faintest tremor of faith, press like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which forgotten road we should follow next. Perhaps the trail of Thomas to India, or the voyage of Bartholomew to the distant Malabar coast. The map is still being drawn, and your voice may be the compass that points the way.